Hi, I'm John Michael Garapi, and this is Popcorn Roulette. Each episode, I invite a guest on the show, they suggest a movie, and we get together and we talk about the movie. Today I have with me Ron Charette. Ron, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing pretty good. We are separated by tables because we are doing this in the time of COVID.
We are?
Yes. Were you not aware of this?
I'm not wearing a mask.
This is a very important point to get across.
Oh, that's the tables.
What are we talking about today, Ron?
Oh, well.
Why'd you bring me here? Why'd you sit me down at this table?
Well, the reason why, I'm glad you came here today, John.
Okay.
Because the most important thing we need to talk about
Yes.
is the movie Strange Days. It was made in 1995.
Ralph Fiennes, Angela Bassett, Juliette Lewis, Tom Sizemore, directed by Kathryn Bigelow, and script originally by James Cameron, and was also touched up by somebody else. James Cameron also did a bunch of editing, but so did somebody else, so it's kind of hard to actually figure out how much of it was actually him. First of all, real quick, who are you, Ron? We can find you on another episode of Popcorn Roulette, right?
Yeah. Actually, that was probably, it was Fifth Element. That was a lot of fun. That movie was a lot of fun. After watching Strange Days again, it's just really kind of funny because Fifth Element was from 1997, Strange Days being 1995. It's almost like I saw Strange Days after I saw Fifth Element, like way after. First time I saw Strange Days was during New Year's Eve.
The New Year's Eve party.
1999.
That we specifically played Strange Days because they count down to New Year's Eve. So we played it.
And I was the official timer. So
Were you the official timer?
I figured out when it was supposed to happen, and I was the one that pressed the play button.
According to the tagline of Strange Days, it's New Year's Eve, 1999. Anything is possible. Nothing is forbidden. So what exactly did you do in 2000 when nothing was forbidden?
Well, a lot of the taglines in Strange Days, they're over the top for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
When you look at the movie posters, they're just trying to get people to watch the movie as if it's some sort of salacious thing.
Before we get into it, I'm going to ask you the toughest question of today. If you can synopsize Strange Days.
That is pretty tough.
A lot of these movies, this one especially, very complicated. We need to break it down for our audience.
Well, Strange Days, again, it's directed by Kathryn Bigelow, written by James Cameron. And as we know, James Cameron went on to do a lot of very interesting movies, as well as Kathryn Bigelow. Kathryn Bigelow obviously was Hurt Locker. James Cameron did things like Avatar. They like to stuff scripts with story. That's why I mentioned Fifth Element, is because a lot of the story that they partake in, it's so rich, it's so full, it's so vivid. And the characters themselves, Ralph Fiennes, who is essentially a dealer in dreams that he tries to play to people's pleasure sensors, as far as like what they want. There's a headset that people can wear that has miraculously been invented by 1999, where people can put this on their heads and then they can experience other people's lives, essentially. It goes everywhere from, mundane tasks all the way up to the most violent thing you can possibly imagine. Among that story between Lenny and his buyers, there's also the situation where you have the regular lives of these people embroiled in, like, let's say, an LA riot period, where there's a lot of upheaval, there's a lot of violence that's occurring on the streets. And there's a lot of reconciliation that's attempting to be done by some people and a lot of damnation that's being done by others. It seems like it's very dystopian in some ways, but in other ways, again, like the dystopian side is the people that are trying to create damnation, and the people that are trying to do reconciliation are the ones that are essentially trying to create a utopia out of what's existing. And it's kind of interesting how they both can coexist. But that's what I was trying to say with Kathryn Bigelow and James Cameron. They sort of came together on this particular movie. They took multiple themes, multiple threads, and they wove them, in my opinion, very masterfully. On my second viewing of the movie, I got so much more out of it than the first, where the first was kind of like, we were having fun. It was more like an entertainment. The second time, it was, obviously, we were watching it so we could talk about it.
Right.
And so the depth of the movie really became better understood by watching it that second time.
There is a lot in this movie. Like, I watched it in 1995. I watched it again in 2000. I watched it more recently and whatnot. And there is just more that you just pick up as you're going along. I mean, the same can be said about any movie, but this is a complicated plot, all things considered. Yeah. What's actually going on is not what you're seeing on the screen oftentimes, too.
Oh, no, there's a lot that can be taken away from the movie when you're talking about the backstory, like what people are doing behind the scenes, things you don't see. It's almost like the movie is, more importantly, the things you don't see.
So in a 1990 interview, Bigelow said that she likes to mix genres and reinvest them with new information. So if Strange Days is mixing of genres, what genres are we mixing right now?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, you have the violence movie, you have
just like
drama.
Straight action movie.
Yeah, straight action. You have intrigue and, like kind of like a film noir.
Film noir, definitely.
Hip-hop Like you have a hip hop backbeat.
There's an interest. There's a very big music component to this movie. It's almost like an extended music video at times. I don't want to say like always, because it's really the music comes to the forefront at points and then recedes back.
Yes.
Well, while we're on that subject, let's talk about the soundtrack. What is your opinion? Like, here's a list of people on the soundtrack: Skunk Anansie, Lords of Acid, PJ Harvey, Aphex Twins, Peter Gabriel. That's a rather eclectic group of musicians.
Impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about that time. A lot of those people, they weren't necessarily extremely well known, but the idea is that it's a tour de force in music, when you talk about that time period. You have hard driving music, and you have the tones are like, so for instance, there's actually scenes where you have concerts. There's concert goers, there's live music that integrates into the actual, thing that you have stage performances occurring in the movie itself, which I'm trying to remember if that was a thing back then. It made it more entertaining, in my opinion. You could sit there and listen to a song and you weren't sure what was happening because, Juliette Lewis was belting out a couple tunes, and then you had all this other music in the mix. So it's like, I did think it had a lot of weight, as far as the music had a lot of weight as far as driving the movie forward, and especially because the hip hop side, for instance, becomes an integral issue with Lenny and the manager of a couple acts. There's a struggle between the two of those. So there's a musical tie linking you back to the main characters. The thread, again, they built a thread there and they worked it out, and it added so much more to the film, in my opinion.
So one of the other interesting things about the way that Bigelow directs is that she uses a lot of first-person perspective. And I was just wondering, I could tell you that this was unique and new at the time. Like, they had to invent a camera for this movie, specifically the 8-pound 35-millimeter camera, and put it on a Steadicam, because there weren't cameras this light and small, and they wanted to make this very in your face. I didn't know what sort of impact this has on the movie.
I mean, I'm a very big fan of technology. One of the things about the movie industry is I'm always interested in the innovations that they play. The Steadicam thing, that was around for a while.
Yeah,
I believe.
Before the movie, Steadicam wasn't new.
Yeah, before the movie was up, but again, because you see those squid devices, the devices that they put on their heads to translate the other person's feelings and emotions and actions into their own minds when they're watching these dreams. The idea is that they have these little mini CD players. Well, back then, those little mini CD players weren't really a thing so much. Bigger compact discs were a thing, and you see those, but then you see the smaller ones. The smaller ones are supposed to kind of denote the cooler compact discs. And they even call them tapes.
Yeah.
In some aspects, so they forget to call them discs, or maybe they're just trying to be more relatable. But compact discs were still kind of a new thing. But what I'm trying to say is that by having the newer technology in the film, and also the newer technology that's surrounding the film, it only serves to reason that the film itself would be an innovator, especially with James Cameron. I don't know how much he was innovating before Strange Days, but obviously after Strange Days, to the bottom of the Mariana Trench and everything
this
like that.
This is a really interesting thing with that time period, because Bigelow takes a real dive because of Strange Days, because this is the first big budget movie she ever got her hands on, and then it was a box office bomb. Something about it did not quite connect with the audience, and they didn't come in and watch it. So we don't even see her make another movie for 5 years, and it takes her a long time before she makes The Hurt Locker and comes back in a big way.
I just wanted to tie up that loose end real quick.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So I guess the idea is that, a lot of the people surrounding Hollywood at the time were trying to create something that was just fresh, new, innovative, something nobody has ever seen before, hard driving, they went over the top. And I think that going over the top, and like we're talking about, so with the Steadicam thing, for instance, just to tie that loose end up, with Blue Steel, I think that was the movie. That was a movie that was before Strange Days, and that was one where first person was used. So the idea is that she had already had an inkling to want to go in that direction, and she didn't have that equipment. So she knew what she wanted for the next go-around. Same thing happened with the Bourne trilogy and beyond, is because they were trying to innovate in ways, because they realized, the director of photography was trying to realize things that he wanted to do in other Bourne movies, but he couldn't because the technology wasn't there. So by the time the next Bourne came around, he was like, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. Even in the last few years, they've come up with new innovations with regard to Steadicams and other things like that. So by no means is the set thing at that point. There's still innovations as the technology gets, cameras get smaller, lighter, things like that, and get incorporated into other pieces of technology. She tries to get into the movie to basically do the best that she can And she doesn't necessarily hit it on the head because there are scenes where the Steadicam thing doesn't necessarily work out to her credit. But like you can see she's getting closer.
Yeah. I'm going to break us up here because I got a negative review to actually deal with right now.
Okay.
We going to do something a little bit different. This time we happen to have a negative review specifically from Gene Siskel at the movies, which means I have a video negative review for you.
Oh, geez.
There's a lot I like and don't like about Strange Days. I like the idea of the danger of recycling other people's experiences and trying to live your own life that way. But I really couldn't get into any of the mysteries in the story. They seemed so overblown and didn't involve me because they didn't have the power, frankly, of any of Lenny's clips. Their violence, laced with sexuality, dwarfed even the impressive production design of the film, built, of course, along Blade Runner lines. Also, many times during Strange Days, I couldn't believe that these fine actors got involved in this story. I didn't believe any of their characters. The film grapples with big ideas, but soils them, I think, with conventional movie melodrama of rape and murder. So I can't quite recommend Strange Days.
So what did you think of Gene Siskel's assessment of the movie?
Well, I think his last point is very valid. What I would say with regard to the characters themselves not being believable, there were a few instances where I was like, why is Faith acting that way? Why is Mace doing this? What's Max really up to? And Lenny's character, it's a hard time understanding, wrapping my head around, why he was doing what he was doing. I do agree. It's Siskel, right?
Yeah. Actually, Ebert jumps in immediately afterwards.
Okay.
Ebert gets cut off because Ebert actually calls this what he thinks the best movie of the year. So those two never really agreed on anything.
Agree.
I could fill this entire negative review thing of just either Siskel or Ebert.
Siskel's looking at the characterization of people, and as his main driving point. And one of the things about that is he's right. It's a very long movie. It's very tiresome because it's kind of amped all the way through because you're always trying to figure things out and piece things together. And sometimes you only get one piece of information once that's going to change the way you think about something. And that's really difficult because to have a movie that's built around the fact that you have to watch it multiple times, that did happen a fair amount, in the 90s. I do remember that, a few films where it's like you couldn't catch everything at the same time. It was just impossible.
I actually wonder how much of this was just like DVDs was now a thing. So therefore, we almost want to make movies a little more. Maybe you should buy it and bring it home after. Look at the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they were trying to experiment with that. Because I do remember watching movies in my childhood and be like, oh, I got to watch that again. There's no way I saw everything.
It was just too fast.
But like what I would say is that I would also, again, with Siskel, I would agree because some of those characters have not played out in my mind the way that I would expect them to. And I would think that if there were motivations, I'm not sure the motivations were valid based on what would have driven the story forward.
Well, let's look at some of our main characters here. Like Lenny is supposed to come off as slimy, but does he come off as likable? How does that work?
For me, I guess, is Lenny supposed to be a protagonist, would you say?
I guess I wouldn't call him the hero, but I would call him the protagonist.
Okay. I guess that's where I was trying to go with that. And what would your definition of protagonist?
Someone who drives the action forward.
So he definitely does that. I don't see him as a hero.
Do you see Angela Bassett's character Mace as a hero?
She is more like a hero. Her character, I think, is kind of more important than Lenny's.
Well, I mean, we've talked beforehand about how you saw Mace as being a mirror to what's going on, either in the plot or with Lenny, because he's kind of both the plot and the character. I don't have a backup question for that. I mean, dangerous territory right now.
Yeah. I think it just goes to show how complex the movie really is. Again, to drive the story forward, we have Lenny. To be essentially a mirror to what's going on and a reactionary force, I think we have Mace. For the... well, I can't give too much away. But I guess the supporting characters, the other characters. I mean, they're working their own motivations and they're doing their own things for their own reasons. And a lot of the reasons, I can't figure it out.
Yeah, we spoil movies on this show. So as we go a little bit further, if you haven't seen Strange Days, maybe you should watch it because we're diving a little bit further into that territory.
Yeah, now we're starting to get into it.
Though I do want to talk about themes more than anything else right about now. And I was wondering, do you think that memories should be forgotten? Because that seems to be one of the driving ideas going on in here. Should we keep our memories? Like if you had the ability to have a squid technology and you could save and store old memories of yours, would you want to?
Me personally?
You personally? No. Why not?
No, because I have a pretty good imagination and memory as it is.
Yeah.
Would I want to share that stuff or would I want to record certain things? Body cameras. things like that, new technology that we have these days.
They do exist. You can't share experiences, but feelings and whatnot, but you certainly can share. It's kind of true. It's like body cameras didn't exist back in 1995, so that's part of the shtick.
No, the whole Steadicam thing had to be invented. I mean, technically, it's a follow-on to that in a way. But, when it comes to sharing actual experiences, no. I have my own experience. It's interesting. So from a clinical perspective, it's very, I think, important, for if we want to understand the human condition, to understand somebody else's ideas and emotions and feelings. That seems rather important reason to have the technology. But from my perspective, living my day to day, I have no use for it, in my opinion.
Would you call this movie prophetic in the way it actually? Because this movie is about the turn of the century. It was made in 1995. It really was only looking 5 years in the future. How close do you think Bigelow got to this vision of the future?
I think it's more a reflection on the past, because it's taking sort of like, the fears and hopes and dreams of everybody that is kind of before 1995. And, for instance, the LA riots, Y2K.
Or just even the compound in Waco, Texas, and the way that the FBI cracked down on that.
Oh, the militarism.
The militarism, yeah.
Yeah. And the creation of content, oddly enough. It was before essentially the sharing of videos and ideas and things like that from a easy perspective, so that everybody can kind of relatively palpable sense of what somebody else wants to put out there. For me, it took a lot of things that people were kind of seeing, like the World Wide Web was not even really a thing back then. I mean, it was, but not really that deep. Again, that's why it's film noir, in my opinion, is because people had to go to each other. And the idea of experiencing, like let's say a FaceTime with somebody using your handheld phone wasn't anything that was ever possible. And, having a device in your hand that you could put, a set on your head is kind of like a leap beyond that. But at the same time, it's almost like steampunk in the way that, it's approaching technology. It's sort of a great leap forward, instead of, using the knowledge of what's in the past, as opposed to expecting what's going to happen in the future.
Considering how this movie ends, I'm actually wondering if you think that that Bigelow is presenting us with a future that she thinks is going to be a hopeful world, or if she is looking forward to a dystopia. Do you think? Here's the thing, and I'm not actually kind of getting at what audiences want, because what audiences want, obviously, audiences want a happy end, and I'm kind of wondering, based upon what we see of this movie as this entirety, where the director's mind is at.
With Kathryn Bigelow, I remember reading a quote. She had said something along the lines of, "She's not a fan of violence, but she is a seeker of truth." I guess in that vein, being a director, she also wants to attempt to show that truth. And so through the conduit of film, she's trying to do that. And maybe that's the back discussions that she had with James Cameron, for instance, where that trying to reconcile, how are we going to take, what's happening in this amazingly dense screenplay and adapt it to the film in a way that's going to speak truth. I don't think she's really worried about necessarily a happy ending. I think it's more like she's trying to drive a story that talks to the way that she sees the human condition, in a way that sort of speaks through actions, not just through words. Like, for instance, one of the things that Mace says to Lenny somewhere in the middle of the film is, "Lenny, you're just all talk." And Mace is very much somebody that acts. She's the true hero, the true protagonist, but Lenny is obviously someone that we're following in the things that he needs to do. So in a sense, he's sort of like leading the action, where Mace is actually creating the story.
Yeah. Well, that seems like as good a place to stop on as any. Hey,
it's a very amazing movie.
It's crazy how fast 30 minutes actually ends up flying when you're actually doing this. I have double the amount of questions. We can't possibly get to them all, unfortunately. Thank you guys for showing up. If you liked what you were hearing, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. There's more stuff on Popcorn Roulette's main channel. We have popcornroulette.org nowadays. So if you just want to check out that thing, we do a bunch. Well, we used to do a bunch of movie nights, but then 2020 came around. But we have all kinds of projects going on popcornroulette.org. And you can obviously subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you, Ron, for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure being here.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.